Hey, after you listen to this episode, you should head over to YouTube and check out the channel called Mighty Startup. That's where my guest today, Brian Yam, talks all things supplements, and he's also interviewed me on one of his latest episodes. So after I interview him here on this podcast, head over to his channel, Mighty Startup. There's a link in the show notes, and you can listen to my episode where he interviews me. Let's get on with the show. Welcome to Health Business Mastery, the Creative Thirst podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Hewitt. Hey, so today's episode, I'm welcoming Brian Yam from Blue Ocean Regulatory and the YouTube channel Mighty Startup. Brian brings 2 decades of regulatory and quality assurance executive experience in the food, dietary, supplements, and natural health product space. Today, Brian and I are going to be talking about avoiding pitfalls. So no matter where you are in your supplement business journey, if you're a supplement company that's just getting off the ground, or if you're a supplement company that's over $1 million in revenue, Brian's got a lot of information to share today. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bobby. Thanks for having me. I have to admit, I'm a huge fan of yours. I've been consuming your podcast for a while now, and I know that you're just scratching the surface of information there, but I find it so valuable, and thank you so much for doing that. And I was telling my wife when we connected over LinkedIn, like how giddy I was. So it's an absolute pleasure to connect with you and to be on your podcast. Thank you so much for having me on.
Same here, Brian. I'm a really big fan of your YouTube channel, Mighty Startup. There's some really great content on that channel.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Brian, when you work with supplement clients, what's your overall sort of philosophy or North Star?
You know, when we work with clients, we really want to start from this perspective of how to give the brand that maximum runway for their business, right? So even though if they're like a sub-$1 million in sales business or higher, we really try to give them that North Star of like, what is that longer term view? How do we make sure that they're distribution ready, investor ready, or buyout ready? Maybe they have aspirations of a buyout, maybe not. Maybe they have aspirations of, being on the shelf in large national retailers, maybe not. But regardless, the idea is like, okay, how do we make them that type of brand? And that's always the guiding light for us and for our clients.
That's a really good point. Different supplement companies have different goals. And depending on where you are in your supplement business journey, one thing may be more important to you than another. So I really like how you tailor each individual client that you work with. What are some of the top pitfalls that you see over and over again working with different supplement clients?
One of them is this idea of trusting the contract manufacturer too much. And there are a lot of good manufacturers. I really want to make that clear. There are a lot of high quality manufacturers out there right now, but there's also a lot of mediocre ones or not so great ones. Some are even brokers that position themselves as a manufacturer. So there's a lot of, gray, shady business that goes out on there. But the big takeaway here is this idea of your contract manufacturer. If you trust them too much, they actually become an area of vulnerability for the business, for the brand. So like an example of this is, they're turnkey, right? This is the language they use on their website, or they're FDA registered, right? They're a legitimate company. Well, they might be.
Clarify that for our listeners. What does FDA registration mean?
It literally means that the facility was registered into the FDA database. Like they entered their name into this database. They didn't get audited. They didn't get approved. But a lot of these manufacturers, they kind of present FDA registered in quotes as like a form of approval when you're talking to the account managers. And so we kind of give our trust to them. A lot of brand owners do, and they just assume that they're going to get the testing right. They'll do full testing. They'll get all the label claims for them. And this is really what we've seen land a lot of brands in trouble when they just let the manufacturer kind of take the reins.
You mentioned testing, and I want to clarify the testing that the manufacturer does And how can this trip you up, or how can this trip up a supplement brand?
If I was a contract manufacturer, what are some of the biggest, deciding factors for a client? Well, price would be one of the big ones, right? And so in order for me to not scare you away, I'm going to shave my per unit cost down. And one way of shaving those costs down is, cheap ingredients, or minimizing testing. And so we've seen a lot of manufacturers, they talk a good game, an account manager, the sales rep, they talk a good game. But when you dive into the documentation, they're actually doing very, very bare bones testing, just like the bare minimum to get by in terms of a manufacturer release. Whereas the entrepreneur, the brand owner, they're like thinking, oh, we test for ID, we test for potency, we test for heavy metals and chemical contaminants, when in fact it's not. But they never realize that until the lawsuit hits, or an investor asks them for the documents, or a lawyer asks them for documents. And we see that a lot when, a client wants to go into a Whole Foods. That's usually when these aha moments happen.
So what do you recommend?
The goal here, the mind shift is, how do we trust but verify? So when we work with our clients, we say, we obviously want to find the right capabilities in the manufacturer, the right certifications, but we will ask them for their contracts, like a business contract between the client and the manufacturer. We will ask them for the testing parameters. We will ask them for the formula. These are normal documents that any manufacturer would make as per GMP. And it's quite okay to ask for these documents. And then that's when you verify and say, okay, are they actually doing what they say they're doing? If they're doing all these tests, are they doing it? Are they saying that they're doing it in the grand scheme of what their operation could do, or are they doing it for your product? And I think that's the key point there. So this trust but verify approach is like this big light bulb moment, I think, for a lot of brand owners. And I believe it's one of those levers that we can pull to avoid a ton of pitfalls later. Very expensive pitfalls, by the way.
So it sounds like very much a situation of what you don't know can hurt you. And it seems like you have to specifically ask the manufacturer for such documentation.
Yeah, you do. And I think, the good manufacturers, they may hint at it or are available to provide any of these documents you ask for. No question, no issue, no hesitation. And then there's some manufacturers, the sales rep, they're banking on your lack of questioning. And so a good example, I've seen this many times. What they'll do is they theoretically have a contract, but they don't show it to you. They don't show it to the brand owner. Okay. In that contract, there's fine print that says, you're liable for all the claims for FDA compliance. You will indemnify us if there's ever a lawsuit. So there's all these terms in the fine print. But then here's where they get people. It's once you go into production, it automatically says that you've abided to their terms and conditions. And so it's really important to ask for these things, and they should have it and produce it to you. And again, a lot of these things, it's just a matter of knowing what questions to ask. And that's something we definitely work with our clients on, and provide some basic questions that can, settle like 80% of these issues just by asking these questions. And then you screen them out. Either you move on, or they address them, and you have even more confidence in your manufacturer. So let's say someone's in the supplement business. They have a product already. They're with this manufacturer, and they never did the due diligence, right? But then they kind of find out from working with you and talking with you that, like, hey, maybe they're not using the right manufacturer. Do you have a sort of a guideline or a strategy for helping them move to a different manufacturer, or is it more simple than that? Is it just really renegotiating with that existing manufacturer? Because you're dealing with, like, you don't want to upset the business because you have your supply chain coming from that manufacturer, but at the same time, you're ready to level up, right? You're ready to maybe increase the potency of the product, or level up so that you can blow up the product and take it bigger and get it in Walmart and Amazon and elsewhere. A really good question. So there's two approaches. I think you hinted at one of them, which is this renegotiation. And typically when a brand is starting to realize that there are some gaps in their compliance or the manufacturer's compliance, they'll bring us in And what we try to do is we work with the manufacturer and kind of put some new testing in place or new programs in place, either at the brand owner level to compensate for some of these gaps, or we essentially instruct the manufacturer to put these new processes in place for them. So that's one fail-safe way of doing it. The other way is to actually transition out. I think prior to going that far, I think as any brand owner should be keeping in mind is that redundancy. COVID really taught that to us. There were a lot of supply issues. Ingredients were unavailable. Couldn't get trailers and ships, right? All of these things, and so it's so important to have backup suppliers, either ingredients or in manufacturers. So I think there's an argument to be made that when the brand is ready of a certain size, that we should start thinking about backup manufacturers. So I think there's that element to it. The last approach is obviously the transition out, and it's a huge undertaking. And it can be done. And obviously, we've worked with a lot of brands that have had to do that. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's just not the right fit. Sometimes the size. Just imagine trying to get into Walmart, 1,500 stores, like the sheer quantity of volume. Not every manufacturer can do that. And so you do have to transition. So you have to port all your formulas, your testing, your ingredients over, ship things over, or source new ingredients as well, redevelop your formula at another contract manufacturer. Sometimes the existing one has rights to the original formula. So there's a lot of complexities that we want to start factoring in. Yeah, it's not an easy exercise. It's a time-consuming one. It's a very, very expensive exercise to do as well. But I think having that backup, and then obviously, if we just implemented a lot of these compliance requirements up front, and keeping that conversation very transparent and the expectations level set for both parties, I think it just makes it way easier. And hopefully you'll never have to transition to another
Yeah,
manufacturer.
absolutely. If you're just getting started and you don't have a formulation yet, I strongly advise you to talk to Brian first. I'm wondering, at what company size do you recommend starting to look at like a backup manufacturer?
I think it would probably be in the double-digit millions if I were to come up with a number. I think really it comes down to who your distributors are going to be. So if you're starting to see that Whole Foods is interested in you and you've done a couple test stores and the business is looking healthy and you're going to be expanding, most likely you're probably thinking about an investment cash injection to kind of help with that expansion, accelerate that expansion. That's when you want to start thinking about who are those backup suppliers. And you don't have to lock into them per se. It's just like around that time, you're shopping for new contract manufacturers, chances are, because the existing one could probably handle your current volumes, but they might not be able to handle the next level for your business. So as you're shopping around, that's the time to start thinking, having the A list and your B list, right? The B list being the backup suppliers and maintaining those relationships. You don't have to do a full scope audit. You don't have to go in there and vet them like crazy, but at least you now have built that relationship so that you can transition or start that conversation. Alternatively, you can find some manufacturers that are so large, they have a manufacturing network. They have multiple facilities. So they kind of built in that redundancy into that one quote unquote manufacturer because they have so many facilities. So that's another way of doing it. But I think it's just keeping that top of mind as you're shopping at that size.
That's a really key gotcha that a lot of people can get tripped up on, especially when they're starting out. I think another area that's kind of similar to that, it's one of those holes that you could fall in very easily, is like claims, and specifically the claims on a label. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think the big takeaway, there's a lot of things around claims and what you can and cannot say. And I think that's usually top of mind for a lot of marketers or brand owners. But the big takeaway, at least from my point of view, is label claims, review or product testing. Even though it's compliant, it's not really compliant. And it's kind of like the inspection, right, of a car. Like, let's say I want to inspect the car, that's all it is. You're not fixing the car. You're not trying to make sure that the car is properly engineered so it can run, the best possible way it can. It's just a check. And so a lot of the times, clients will say, "Hey, Brian, can you please review our labels for these claims?" And usually by the time it hits us, we might find all these problems, but it's way too late. Like your production's already running. It's like we don't have room to fix this label. And so like the big call out here is just know that label review isn't really compliant. It's kind of like a check. And so we really need to think about the upfront like stream and the process and the R&D and building and engineering compliance into it so that your product does meet the regulations. I think that's the biggest call out here. But I mean, if we want to go into like some examples of like regulatory, I can give a simple one here. Sometimes you get claims that are fairly innocent. And the brand owners, like they're just starting the brand out. They're like, I look at my competitors, they've got peanut free. Well, how hard could it be to have a peanut free product? I'm just going to make sure all my ingredients aren't peanuts. And so it's a very innocent line of thinking, which is fine. And then they put peanut free on there. Unfortunately, in the world we live in the litigious world and the food safety world, and the fact that, if we look at the subpopulation of those that are allergic to peanuts, there is no threshold. I could be super, super sensitive to peanuts, whereas another person might not be, right? Even though we're both allergic to peanuts. And on top of it, the government doesn't have a particular threshold, an acceptable threshold of what peanut free, is defined as a testing threshold that doesn't exist for peanut free. And then you've got to look at your supply chain. Does the ingredients, are they truly peanut free? Like maybe to the layperson, an ingredient like ashwagandha, I'm kind of making up this example on the fly here, but an ashwagandha example. Why would there be peanuts? It makes no sense. So you would just assume that this is a fine claim to make. Sometimes there are ingredients that are derived from peanuts or uses another ingredient or another excipient within the ingredient. And that's how some of these allergens get into the ingredients. So you've got that supply chain complexity. And then you look at your manufacturer, do they have the right protocols? Do they have the right design? Sometimes you could have the best protocols, the best operators, the best procedures, but just the way the facility is designed is prone to cross-contamination. So there's that scenario. And then ultimately the testing, and we talked about that already, where there is no government-defined limit. So there's always this gray area of someone saying it's not enough from a testing standpoint, if that makes sense. So when you factor all of these in, a claim like peanut free, while on the surface seems really innocent, it's really not. And so this is kind of why it's so important to not just think of, regulatory being label review or reviewing of the website and the claims there. It's really about engineering your entire product from the ingredients to the manufacturer to the testing to make sure that your product can actually substantiate these claims. And I think that's where going back to that pitfall number one, when we rely on the manufacturer, they're not always thinking about it at that deep level. They're really good at manufacturing. They're really good at encapsulating. They're really good at, testing, like essentially executing the test, executing the production, training the people and keeping their facilities clean. But there's a lot of things that are outside of their control. But unfortunately, we kind of just, the unknowing entrepreneur may just lean on the manufacturer too much, which is why the two kind of go hand in hand. But I would say that's probably one of the bigger pitfalls from a regulatory standpoint. Obviously, I think another really obvious one is just disease claims, drug claims. We still see a lot of this. I'm sure you've seen a lot of this, Bobby, as well. And there are ways of wording your claims so that you do get that same intent, but at least you're not going to get yourself into trouble, right? Like there's ways to do that. And I think there's also a misconception that you can't do disease claims at all. There's room to do disease claims in FDA's guidance. There are certain claims that are approved by FDA, which does speak to disease states. So there are some gray areas that we can definitely leverage. But it's just a matter of knowing which areas you want to, explore, and how you want to position your product, et cetera, et cetera.
Would you say those are the two biggest pitfalls to watch out for?
For regulatory, I think so. I think for the average startup brand, I think those are the big ones. It's just really like, what can you say? What can't you say? And then this idea of where does compliance really fall in? I think those are the biggest keys. So yeah, definitely a lot to factor in, but every product is unique. There's so many cool new ideas that we're running into, and new supplement concepts, and everyone's trying to push that boundary and innovation. And so yeah, there's a lot, but I think those are the three that come top of mind.
So there's not only the manufacturers to worry about, there's the FDA to worry about, and then there's the lawyers to worry about, right?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the other pitfalls, if you will, as we're talking about it, where there are some clients that are like, FDA, like what are the chances of them coming at me, right? They're a small brand, and I get it. The sales are small. There's a small footprint in the food supply chain. I get it. Or FTC, like those are usually the two that are top of mind. Mostly FDA. When you talk to a manufacturer, they're only talking about FDA. They don't talk about FTC, but usually those are the two that go hand in hand. But there's more. Like there is the Customs Border Protection, there is the Consumer Protection and Safety Commission, and a lot of those requirements need to be built into your label, or they need to be built into your product. And then we talked about the state law. So there's a lot more that expands beyond FDA and FTC, and a lot of people just assume it's just the FDA that is the one that they should be watching out for. But I would also argue that there's this new dimension of enforcement or enforcers, and it's not these government agencies, it's the retailers and the Amazons of the world. So Amazon, they got a warning letter, I think late last year, for a brand that was making non-compliant claims. FDA didn't go after the brand. They went after Amazon. So they're really, we believe that FDA is intentionally doing that to strike a chord in Amazon, so that then they'll push down those regulations and the requirements. And that's really where we're seeing the enforcement. We're seeing this with online distributors. They'll have their compliance team look at people's labels, the client's formulas, the claims, the website. Whole Foods has their own compliance team, Walmart, et cetera, Costco. So they're putting all these requirements. They're the ones that's really enforcing the industry now. And I think that's because they've probably got hit with a lot of warning letters, lawsuits, and such. So they're definitely the ones to be watching out for, not necessarily FDA, FTC for the smaller brands. The larger brands, of course, you want to factor everything. And of course, as any good brand wants to be, want to factor all of these, but it's not just FDA and FTC is kind of the big takeaway here.
Yeah, and in many ways, Amazon is kind of just as difficult to deal with as the FDA. Right? Once Amazon pulls you off their shopping network, there's really no going back. It's very difficult to get back. And
yeah, and it's FDA, at least I'll give them credit. They're the people you can speak to. They understand supplements. They understand the world of foods. They understand how this all works. Whereas in Amazon, you might not get face-to-face time. There's no one you can ultimately speak to. And sometimes the people you speak to, they have no idea how this really works, or the nature of your product, and why it's actually not an issue. And sometimes these platforms, if you will, they just don't care. Like they've seen too many lawsuits, and they'd rather play it extra safe and just eliminate the product, delist the product altogether, and kind of going above and beyond what an FDA and FTC would expect. And it's just easier for them that way. And to that point, we're not even just seeing that with Amazon. We're seeing that with social media platforms, your TikToks of the world, your Meta of the world. You say the wrong word, you don't abide by their terms and conditions, even though a lawyer won't go after you, even though FDA won't go after you, they'll just ban your account just like that. So it's something to keep in mind. It's not just FDA and FTC.
Yeah, I've seen that happen on Amazon before with some supplement brands. And not only in Amazon, it's also happening at other platforms, like Meta specifically is a very unique platform to advertise supplements on.
What do you see as the current trend right now with like a Facebook or with like a TikTok? Are you seeing a lot of enforcement right now on that side? Like from a marketing standpoint, are you seeing a lot of pushback from them or how they approve ads or
Yeah, absolutely. There's always ad disapprovals. Ad disapprovals are not as bad as landing page disapprovals. You can typically get over an ad disapproval, but if you have a landing page disapproval, because they do go beyond, they go like one click deep into your ad, and if you have something on your landing page that they don't like, and it gets a little bit more nefarious actually, because it's not simply claims when it comes to Meta, it's how you made the customer feel. So it could be nothing related to claims, but like if you call out like, dealing with hair loss question mark, like, or if you sort of turn that emotional dial to really get under their skin, which is really what makes the sale happen. They feel that, well, you're giving the user a bad experience, you're making them feel negative, and that negativity is kind of, they don't want that negativity to be part of Facebook, right? So that's why they'll ban that account quite often. And if you are calling out the user, which is typical kind of direct response 101, they don't want the user to feel like, oh, Meta knows something about me. And how do they know that? How do they know that I'm dealing with that problem right now? Like, I never told anyone I've got toe fungus, but they know I have toe fungus. They're listening to me, right? Like, they're not at all. But it's just an ad that's doing a good job of like calling out the market with toe fungus. But Meta doesn't like that because it makes Meta look bad because the customer doesn't really understand how it works.
wow, I feel for some of these brands when, like you said, this is how you sell. And I get the challenge there. This is your expertise, this is your world. That's why people hire you and listen to you. But my gosh, you've got your work cut out for you. That's kind of how I see it.
It is very challenging. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how many more years like Meta really has for the direct response community and supplements. I know there's plenty of people making it work. They're making it work usually because they're dealing with a big traffic agency that can kind of get around those issues. But in order to do that, they're paying the big bucks for those agencies.
I bet. Interesting.
So many pitfalls, right? On the ad side, on the regulation side, on the marketing side, on the manufacturing side. But all these pitfalls could be avoided if you know what to look for and if you get them early enough, right? So I know you have a product, supplement startup essentials training product that deals with kind of all those pitfalls and how to get around them, right? So tell us what's in that training, what do customers get?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So we call it SET here. So Supplement Startup Essential Training, SET for short. And essentially what we've done is we just took all the experience we've had over the 2 decades, all the problems, all the issues that large or small brands have had, kind of root cause them and figure out, okay, why is this really happening? And it kind of speaks to some of the things we talked about today. And then we've also taken a lot of the consultations we had with previous clients that are just starting out. They're brand spanking new. They've got this concept. They really want to create their own line of supplements, or maybe they're like an influencer as well. We work with some of those guys, and they just don't know what to do. They don't know how to do it. And so we're kind of pushed them, like kind of molded the two things together and kind of scaled down compliance so it's achievable at this level. And I think that's really what sets us apart. I mean, when we work with clients with our conventional suite of regulatory and compliance services, what it's all about. It's about scaling compliance down to a specific operation. And so it's achievable for them. And so we're really setting out, okay, how do you find the manufacturer? We give people that list of our directory of manufacturers out there. Some of them are on our client network. Some of them have been audited by FDA. So you have a level of assurance as to what you're dealing with. Of course, we teach you how to vet. You still have to do your due diligence. We talk about the testing. We also share how you're supposed to build the claims. What are FDA and FTC expectations? But then what's the right approach? Okay, so now that you have your concept, what do you do next? And how do you bring that to the manufacturer? And how do you stand out from the manufacturers? Like you and I both know manufacturers are getting calls every day from the next person that thinks that their product is going to do well. And they're hearing it all the time. My brand's going to do well. And eventually it just becomes noise to a lot of these manufacturers and they just don't return calls. So we're trying to figure out, okay, what's the best process to get that call back? And how do you essentially get a formula that's like 85% of the way there? And so essentially we do all the heavy lifting. We, as in the client, does the heavy lifting so that going after the manufacturer is a very streamlined process and is actually welcomed by the manufacturer. And then we teach them how to vet them and build out your testing and review the contracts, all these things. We've also thrown in like industry expert interviews in there. So I've got like a VP of sales in there, a director of brand in there. And so we've just, as we've built out the program, we continually add new content to help these startups launch their brand. So we're essentially taking them from concept all the way to launch, but with this compliance lens. We're really finding this perspective seems to be missing in the whole grand scheme of things. We're talking about R&D. We're thinking about feature benefits, product features, claims. We're thinking about all the cool stuff that the consumer would see. But what we're trying to do is add that plus hit them on this FDA, FTC compliance so that the brand ultimately has either the best runway possible or at minimum, the most friction as possible so that, a lawyer won't even bother with you. You know what I mean? Like, okay, if you just play that boundary just right, they're like, you know what? I'm good. I'm going to look at the other brand that's, making a drug claim, and then they'll stay away from you. So we kind of try to do that, but ultimately kind of set the tone and give the future entrepreneurs out there that basic level of education so that they can launch a brand they're super confident in and know that ultimately don't have to make any huge pivots later on. They're set to go. They've got the right foundation for a product that their consumers would be proud to ingest and buy.
Not just avoiding that lawyer who's coming after you, right? But avoiding that Amazon ban hammer.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. This is a good point. And we always factor that in. Like, okay, what's your operation? Where do you guys want to sell? Like that's a super key component of the equation. And then from that kind of drives what those requirements are. And the SET program kind of introduces those concepts. We do pair the SET program with one-on-one consultations, and that way we can really give that tailored experience to that particular future entrepreneur, future brand owner.
And there are, I think, about 50 videos right now in that SET program, if I'm not mistaken. And
yeah, I haven't done the full count, but there's a lot, and we continue to add to that. I would say it's at least 5 hours worth of content, but all of it we believe is crucial information that you need at this early stage of the game before anyone spent a penny on the LLC, branding, logo, or worse yet, like signed into a commitment. I've seen that where clients have lost, $5,000-$10,000 just on the deposit alone, realizing that this wasn't going to work out and wish they had seen something like SET before so they could have avoided something like that. But lots of stuff there. And like I said, it's something that we continually add and improve and try to give as much value as we possibly can to our audience.
If anyone's interested, I have an affiliate link to Brian's SET program. Just head over to creativethirst.com/SET, SET, and that'll take you to Brian's sales page to tell you all about the product. So if someone wants to go deeper, right? Someone wants to get more than just the SET program, how can they work with you? Where can they find you?
Sure. My website is blueoceanregulatory.com. They can reach out that way. My email is brian@blueoceanregulatory.com. I also have a YouTube channel, as you alluded to earlier. It's called Mighty Startup, and there's tons of free content there that your audience, if they want to take a look at that, all about how to analyze a certificate of analysis, how to find a manufacturer, what other pitfalls to watch out for, best practices, etc. And we've attempted, quote unquote, to make regulatory topics as consumer friendly as possible and try to make it watchable as possible. It's not the most exciting and sexy of topics, but we try to do our best to make it something that's easy to understand and really geared to that entrepreneur, the one that's never built a supplement brand before, that's never been exposed to this industry before. We really want to make sure that it's something they can just consume and definitely reach out to us, and we can definitely set up a consultation or figure out other ways to help these clients out and launch the brand right.
I think you've definitely accomplished it. The YouTube channel is great. There's tons of great engaging content, and I love it. I really love what you do there.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It means a lot because, like I said, it's not the sexiest of topics, but I'm always open to feedback, and those words are very well appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's something the industry clearly needs, definitely.
Beautiful. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you so much, Brian, for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Bobby. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to reconnecting again.
Creative Thirst is a direct response digital agency focusing on conversion rate optimization and A/B testing. We work with dietary supplement companies who are struggling to maximize the profitability of their funnels so they can scale. Through the last 7 years in the online health space, we've optimized many dietary supplement businesses. And in that time, we've uncovered the 3 critical funnels for success. We put together that information in a free digital download called The 3 Funnels Every Health Supplement Business Needs to Build a Multi-million-dollar Empire. You can get that free report by going to creativethirst.com. Scroll down to the appropriate section and click on the blue Get Your ebook button.